I think a culture without spirituality is in real danger of not understanding the inner life, seeing only what's superficial. And I think you can see how our society, Western culture in particular, I'm talking about this country, is losing touch with the reality of its past, particularly when it comes to issues like death and danger and tragedy. You look at the ways that we now try to commemorate people who die sudden death along the roadways. People don't know how to cope with the tragedy of death and sudden death and tragedy in a way that if you look at ancient cemeteries, if you go back to the cemeteries in the 19th century dotted around Australia and you look at the memorials on the tombstones of families who lost babies and young children, they are full of the same grief and tragedy, but with a sense of hope and belief in the afterlife, in resurrection, in the continuing reality of that person's life in some other way. That, I believe, gave people once upon a time some hope and some solace. People today don't have that. They don't know the story of their culture's past.
There's an old word, acedia. It means spiritual torpor, an absence of zeal for divine things. Former American politician William Bennett says acedia brings with it a sadness, a sorrow of the world. The slothful man hates the spiritual. He wants to be free of its demands. The old theologians taught that acedia arises from a heart steeped in the worldly and carnal, and from a low esteem of divine things. It eventually leads to a hatred of the good altogether. Spiritual acedia is not a new condition, of course, but today it is in ascendance, helped along by an aggressive secularity.
In the 1900s, people talked about secular education. They didn't mean God-free education, they meant education for this world. And secular has now come to mean anti-God.
We're not animals, and we don't want our society to be ruled by the law of the jungle, where the strong take what they can and the poor and the weak give what they have to. And because I think nearly everyone, certainly in Australia, recognises that truth and justice and compassion, these are spiritual values, not to mention faith, that these are important for good communities.
Where is their hope? Back within the hushed cloisters of the Benedictine monastery, there is purity of thought and spirit to be found. Here, in our weird, market-driven West, a search for the spiritual must be a good thing. Even the monks, from our many spectral spiritualities, are finding common ground. Once a year, New Norcia's Benedictine monks spend the day taking tea and talking with the Buddhist monks of Serpentine, south of Perth. Purity and goodness abounds.
Monasticism which I've seen, which has been successful, is that which has focused on the transcendent, the positive side of religious life, not as a way of escape, but a way of enhancing the goodness in your life, the happiness in your life, the fulfillment in your life.
I think the longing for fulfillment, the longing for enlightenment is present in every human being, and it does underlie their interest in sex and drugs and other things that attract them. If you can evoke that longing in them and ask what do they really want, what are they looking for in their drugs or in their sex or whatever it is that they're into, I think most of them know what you're talking about. And most of them will say, yes, I find it to some extent in the things that I do, but not as much as I need, not as much as I want. I just make an act of faith that every human being instinctively desires truth, desires love, desires endless happiness.
We live today with economic values that have diminished the things that made the West the preeminent civilization. Democracy, limitless thought, provocative art, wild music, freedom. They say the market makes a good servant, but a bad master. Today, we question the state at every election. We've relegated the church, but we're in thrall of the market, unbridled and dominant in our lives. It's time for atonement. The West needs a new renaissance, a new enlightenment, a new spirituality to unmask this cultural fraud.
Meaning in life is kind of central to health and well-being, but it need not be religious. Today in particular, we're encouraged to find meaning in life in our personal lives, through families, through career, through sport, our own health and fitness, the achievements of our kids and so on. But spirituality, I think, offers something rather deeper. It's central to those age-old questions that we've asked ourselves. Who am I? Where have I come from? Why am I here? It's a very subtle form of meaning, and therefore easily corrupted by societies, including by religions, towards other ends, more political ends, the pursuit of power. But it's also, I think, one of the most powerful forms of meaning, and certainly the only one that transcends our personal circumstances, the social conditions in which we live, and so offers this sort of essential support when during the sort of trouble and strife of mortal existence.
I think that spirituality is about feeling connected, and the epidemic of meaninglessness which we are suffering from is about being disconnected. I think that spirituality is an antidote to alienation. It's where you suddenly feel as if you are connected to the broader cosmos.
Seeking connection is our choice, but do we realize it? It's not that we live in a society devoid of virtue. Many people live well, decently, even honourably. There are families, schools, churches, and neighbourhoods that work. There are places where virtue is taught and learned. But there is a lot less of this than there ought to be. And we know it. Australia needs to reclaim a spirituality to halt our gathering acedia. Because we all need something greater than us to look up to and worship. To recalibrate our moral compass and to enjoy a rich and virtuous life now, we must touch the divine on earth, to offer our souls a better hereafter. Because if this is as good as it gets in the West, well then, we're destined to drown in this abundance of nothing and become the final chapter in this good book of our modern life.